Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 9 wide receiver starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about news around the National Football League in terms of fantasy football, then going into the matchups at the wide receiver position for Week 9, then going over my top 36 wide receiver rankings on the week. Before we begin, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, click that bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. And if you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. Hello, everybody. How's it going? All right. So really quickly, yesterday, almost close to midnight, I think it was past midnight, put out another video that I was kind of referring to yesterday about the mid-season awards. So if you guys haven't checked that out already, you go check that out. Timestamps are down in the description of this video and in that one. So if you're looking, it's more of a comedic episode more than anything. But all in all, I think it's pretty enjoyable. So hopefully you can go check that out and you enjoy it. All right. So we're talking about a couple pieces of news before we get into wide receivers. Obviously, the biggest pieces of news. So Andy Dalton the other day was benched after 9 years as starting quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals. The dude is done. They're going to put in Ryan Finley, rookie quarterback, coming next week. So that should be interesting. Also, in terms of information from the Bengals, AJ Green has resumed doing a little bit of individual drills or some sort of exercises, which is looking like it's progressing in the correct direction. And he has also stated that he would like to have a long-term deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. So potentially maybe they can strike a deal, but either way, I think he's leaning towards coming back potentially next week. Other than that, other rookie quarterbacks that could be playing. Drew Lock will probably be the replacement for Joe Flacco with that herniated disc in his neck or whatever. And Dwayne Haskins is probably going to be getting the start for the Washington Redskins this week. Other piece of information about the Washington Redskins, Trent Williams, who is finally let go of his holdout and has resumed and came back to the team, was not physically cleared during the medical inspection, his physical today. So that's not good. Not good one bit, but it is what it is. Outside of that, in terms of news around the National Football League, it's kind of been quiet. We're hearing some news that, James Conner didn't practice today. Like I mentioned yesterday, if in fact James Conner doesn't play, you want to have Jalen Samuels because Benny Snell went down with an injury in that game. And Jalen Samuels is coming off of that knee surgery that, they go in, clean it up. He's good in 3 weeks. He should be fine this week. And if in fact James Conner is to miss this week with the AC sprain in his shoulder, then Jalen Samuels is a good running back, and you should have him. And especially for those of you who are struggling with bye weeks, we know that the Falcons, the Saints, the Rams, and the Bengals are all on bye week. This is a guy that can immediately help your team this week and potentially give you some much needed value at the running back position. So other than that, there'll be some more information that I guess kind of makes itself aware. We're still waiting on the likelihood of whether or not a guy like Devante Adams is going to play this week or a guy like Patrick Mahomes. Only time will tell, but again, that's why we have updates every day so we can stay up to date on the news, and we'll talk about a majority of that tomorrow as it progresses and a little bit on Friday. All right, so let's talk about the wide receiver position, starting off with the matchups going into Week 9 of the fantasy football season. As we all know, on the left of me, there we go, we have wide receivers and defenses that are giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers in half PPR scoring formats. The Eagles are a team that, even though John Brown didn't do much, Cole Beasley found himself a touchdown in that game last week despite the weather conditions and all that noise. So the Eagles still giving up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. Is Mitchell Trubisky going to be able to take advantage of that with Allen Robinson? Only time will tell. The Houston Texans struggling heavily against opposing wide receivers, and they're getting to play against the Jacksonville Jaguars in London. And the thing about the Jaguars is, as of late with Gardner Minshew, they've been pretty consistent in terms of passing. Chark's been great. Conley's been great the last 2 weeks. D.D. Westbrook, even though he didn't do anything this past week, the 2 weeks or 3 weeks before that, he had a pretty good streamline of targets and work that he was consistently seeing. So that's definitely something that we want to go ahead and perhaps get a piece of, considering the Texans defense lost J.J. Watt, already playing poorly against opposing wide receivers, something that we might want to key in on. Moving on. The New York Giants, another team that's struggling. And Dak Prescott, the last time we saw him play against that defense, they torched them for a lot of points through the air, whether it was Amari Cooper or Michael Gallup. Hopefully we can continue to see something like that this coming Monday night on the Monday night game between the Giants and the Cowboys. And the Falcons, they're on a bye week. Tampa Bay Buccaneers cannot stop a soul in the passing game, but last week were pretty good. even though A.J. Brown scored a touchdown, Tajay Sharp scored a touchdown, I don't think the receiving game is what really killed them in the end, which really like got the Tennessee Titans over the top in winning that game. So either way, Tampa Bay, they're moving some players around. They're trying to see if they can fix this or hot fix this the secondary, which is probably not something that you could fix over a week. So I think DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett should be good this week. The Oakland Raiders playing against the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions, whether it's Marvin Jones or Kenny Golladay, we know Amendola is always going to be producing as a slot there, so that should be good. The Dolphins, the Jets, both playing one another. That should be a fun shootout. Hopefully, if in fact we don't see the Jets produce well after those last two games, yes, they could be. They were more difficult playing against the Jaguars and the New England Patriots. Those aren't easy matchups, but hopefully now that we've kind of gotten past those two matchups, it should be all green going forward, and it should be Sam Darnold, Robby Anderson, and Jamison Crowder producing. If in fact we don't see anything like that this week against Miami, then we are in trouble, and that team is pretty much dead to me. Moving on, the New Orleans Saints been pretty good as of late against opposing wide receivers. Christian Kirk had a pretty good number last week, but all in all, still playing well against defensively. And then we have the Detroit Lions, where the Oakland Raiders will have themselves a pretty fun day. That should be a shootout of a game. And then let's talk about more of the difficult matchups. The Titans, the Packers, the Chargers, the Chiefs, the Bears, the Cowboys, the Bills, the 49ers, the Broncos, and the Patriots. Now, the thing is, like the Patriots, okay, they get to play against Marquise Brown. Like Marquise Hollywood Brown is coming off an injury. Is he even a big enough threat to where we have to even like consider him as an option? That's the biggest question. Like typically he's probably just going to be covered by Stephon Gilmore. They're going to double team him. They're not going to allow him to take the top off the defense. But the question is, Bill Belichick every single week will take away one of your specific players, and he's going to take away the thing that you love to do the most, and that's probably running the option with Lamar Jackson. I think you'll key in on that. Maybe there's a possibility in which a guy like Marquise Brown could take the top off the defense with his speed, have himself a decent week. The Denver Broncos, Chris Harris Jr. has locked down just about everybody this year. Not just about. He locked down everybody. And last week we heard Odell Beckham complaint. He made it, his complaints known that he wanted to test Stephon Gilmore more in that game. Is Baker Mayfield going to be able to test a guy like Chris Harris Jr.? Is he going to throw picks? That's the biggest question. The 49ers, Larry Fitzgerald hasn't shown up in a couple weeks, but Christian Kirk has looked better. Can he at least be the contributing factor in this offense to at least help this team move the ball? Because on the ground, not going to really work. Edmonds is out. Drake's the only running back there. They're saying David Johnson's a game-time decision. I don't know if that's even going to work. That's tough. Then we got the Buffalo Bills playing against a rookie quarterback in Dwayne Haskins. The trickiest part about Terry McLaurin is the fact that as soon as Case Keenum was out of that game, Terry McLaurin did not catch a single ball in the second half with Dwayne Haskins. That is a struggle, and that's something that you got to be worried about. All right, anyway, let's go ahead and talk about my top 36 rankings at the wide receiver position now that we've kind of gone over the matchups and a couple of them here and there. All right, so the top 36, we're going to start off with the top 12, talking about my wide receiver ones on the week, starting off with number 1, DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, DeAndre Hopkins in the last couple weeks, he has been improving. Comparatively to that stint of games in which he was struggling heavily throughout the season, I think as of late, DeAndre Hopkins is getting to a point where we can trust him a little bit more and more. Yes, I have him nearly in my top 3 every single week because of his talent. Just the last 2 weeks, over 100 receiving yards in both games, has had 20 catches in the last 2 weeks, and yes, unfortunately didn't catch a touchdown last week against Oakland, even though, in my opinion, it was an easier matchup. I think this matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, yes, it might be in London, but I really do believe with the absence of Jalen Ramsey, no more, DeAndre Hopkins going forward, anybody in this division, especially T.Y. Hilton also, any number 1 wide receiver, even Corey Davis potentially, in this AFC South division is blessed that they don't have to play Jalen Ramsey twice a year. And to be honest, I think the one who benefits from that the most is a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. Last time they played against Jacksonville, caught the ball 5 times for 40 yards. That's not what you want to see from a DeAndre Hopkins. Now that he's taking on probably AJ Boye, I don't think it's that much difficult. In terms of difficulty, AJ Boye is a good cornerback, but I don't think it's Jalen Ramsey-esque in terms of being able to stop Hopkins. I think he'll be fine. And that's why I have him at my number 1. I think he's going to have a monster week. over there in London. Should be a shootout in my opinion, back and forth. All right, moving on to number 2, Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper, last time, what did you do against the New York Giants in week 1? 106 receiving yards, a touchdown, 6 receptions on 9 targets. Not much of a surprise. I think that should continue to stay as suit. I mean, thus far this season, Amari Cooper has been really consistent. The last time he played against the Eagles, 100 yards over them, and has been pretty good. Outside of the couple weeks in which he was missing time because of his health, the ankle injury and all that kind of jazz. Outside of that, Amari Cooper has been as good as advertised this season, and as of right now, going into this matchup, should be a key part of this offense, and he's my number 2 on the week. Moving on to number 3, Mike Evans. All right, Mr. Mike Evans. Mike Evans is tricky, right? Because him and Chris Godwin kind of sometimes go every other week, right? One week it's Chris Godwin having the monster week. One week it's Mike Evans. Hopefully, we're going to see something a little bit different in which we have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin producing in the same week, and both of them popping off. This past week, Mike Evans had 12 targets and 11 receptions. Not often do you ever see Jameis Winston put the ball on Mike Evans that often, or do you see Mike Evans catch the ball at that high of a rate? That was something that we had not seen maybe in Mike Evans' entire career, because typically he sits around like a 65% catch rate because of the inconsistencies of Jameis Winston, and in fact, there's always coverage that could stop him from catching the ball. But last week, 198 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, did a lot of damage in the first half. And going into this week against the Seahawks, I don't think this is a difficult enough matchup to where Mike Evans is going to be shut down. I think him and Chris Godwin will both be fine. Hopefully he can continue to stay on the streak because the upcoming games are juicy. You get to play against Seattle this week, then you get Arizona, New Orleans, and then you get a lot of divisional matchups where you have to play against Atlanta, and should be fun from there on out for the next couple weeks. Mike Evans this week against Seattle, my number 3. Moving on to number 4, Julian Edelman, the thumbnail. Julian Edelman sneakily has become, he is the number 7 wide receiver in fantasy. Before the season started, a lot of people doubted his value. Like last season when he came back from weeks 5 through 16, 5 through 17 technically, Julian Edelman was like the number 9 wide receiver in fantasy in half PPR. People doubted that he had so much value. With all of the absences in terms of value at wide receiver, there's no more Gronk, there's no more Edelman, there's no more Cordell Patterson, there's no more Antonio Brown, there's no more Josh Gordon right now. N'Keal Harry's on IR. There are so many pieces that are outside of this offense and no longer with them. Brady has no one else to throw to. Philip Dorsett, Mohamed Sanu, sure, these guys have value, but they don't have the combination in which Edelman and Brady do. They have a chemistry that is unmatchable. And as of right now, in the last couple of weeks, the dude has seen 10-plus targets the last 3 weeks, 15, 12, and 11, consistently catching the ball, finding work in the red zone. He's been incredible, and I don't think he's slowing down. He's my number 4. Moving on to Chris Godwin at number 5. I did mention him kind of slowing down this past week. Unfortunately, didn't see too many targets. 8 targets, 4 receptions. In the last couple weeks, that's the lowest amount of targets he had seen since week 3. Chris Godwin is a receiver that needs a high amount of targets, even though he still managed to salvage his week with a 2-point conversion and a good amount of receiving yards. Eventually, we're going to have to see him get back to that 100-plus kind of performances, because that's what we expect at this point, right? We've seen him do 4 performances of 100-plus yards. We've seen him catch 2 touchdowns in 2 separate games thus far this season. We want those big performances back, and I think we could find that this week. Therefore, Chris Godwin, he's my number 5. Moving on to number 6, Stefon Diggs. All right, so I kind of thought about this for quite some time, and I thought to myself, between the two, Stefon Diggs and Adam Thielen, who potentially has the higher upside between the both of them? I personally think, considering Adam Thielen is coming off that hamstring injury that forced him to miss Thursday night's game last week, there is a potential, in fact, that Stefon Diggs, who has been on a hot streak, can potentially, in my opinion, have the better performance and or upside this week against the Kansas City Chiefs. I think this is going to be a higher scoring matchup, despite whether or not Patrick Mahomes plays. If Patrick Mahomes plays, then it's even better for a guy like Stefon Diggs. Let's not forget, Stefon Diggs, 4 times in the last 5 weeks has caught over 100 receiving yards. That is something that you cannot replace, and he is continuously finding value within this offense, whether or not he is the number 1 or number 2 receiver, whether he gets the most targets or not. This is a team that loves to run the ball, and they're setting up a lot of play action and finding Stefon Diggs open. And I think because of a lot of the attention probably going towards the side of Adam Thielen as he makes his return this week, I think Diggs has the higher upside. Therefore, he's at my number 6. Moving on to another player in this matchup on the Kansas City Chiefs side of the ball, we have Tyreek Hill. Now, like I mentioned last week, I did believe that Tyreek Hill was going to get some work. We saw him get work out of the backfield. We saw him, because of the fact that people have to respect his speed, they have to play 10 yards off. And especially when you do that, that's just a 7-yard catch every single time consistently. And he's going to find value every week, whether or not Patrick Mahomes is his quarterback or under center. So as of right now, I'm hoping Patrick Mahomes can come back, because if he can, what I have personally seen from Xavier Rhodes in the last 2 weeks, I mean, he's been destroyed. Marvin Jones killed him, and in the first half of last week's game against the Redskins, Terry McLaurin, a rookie wide receiver of all people, was able to really make him struggle. I think a guy like Tyreek Hill, which he'll probably have to cover, is far too fast for him. And the secondary of that Minnesota defense has not been incredible thus far this season. And I think Tyreek Hill has a pretty good opportunity of being a top 5 back with upside, top 5 wide receiver with upside. We'll see. He's at my number 7 for right now. Because of Matt Moore, we'll see how that offense turns out. Moving on to number 8, Adam Thielen. Again, Adam Thielen and Stefon Diggs are getting back to where they were last year, both being top 12 wide receivers on a weekly basis. Because of the nature of this game, I know that the Minnesota Vikings want to run the ball. They want to kill clock, and they want to play defense, and that's mainly where they stand as of right now in terms of game plan. But a lot of the game plan will have to be Adam Thielen and Stefon Diggs heavily contributing in order for this team to win this game today. What am I doing? Yikes. I gotta wash my face and wake up a little bit. What's happening? This weekend, excuse me. Wow, Adam Thielen, you really threw me off there, huh? But as of right now, Adam Thielen, between him and Stefon Diggs, I think Adam Thielen is the number 1. In terms of targets that he's gotten, I know in the last couple of weeks they've really tried to get Stefon Diggs more and more implemented in this offense because of all that trade rumor jazz and all that. But as of right now, I do believe that Adam Thielen, in terms of getting down to the red zone, if you're going to find somebody that's going to score a touchdown, it is him. Thus far this season has caught a touchdown in 5 different games. And against the Kansas City Chiefs, it's not too difficult of a matchup. I think he'll be fine. He's my number 8. Moving on to number 9, Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay, Mr. Every Other Week, had a fantastic performance this past week, and he gets a really good matchup against the Oakland Raiders. We saw DeAndre Hopkins take advantage of that full well. As of right now, a guy like Kenny Golladay, even though he's not getting 10-plus catches like a Mike Evans or a DeAndre Hopkins, he is still producing because of his usage in the red zone, and that is something that you cannot replace, and that's something that he has an advantage over a lot of these other receivers. Unfortunately, are we going to see him put up a 2.6 game? Because throughout this season, 12 points, 21 points, 2 points, 21 points, 14 points, 2 points, 25 points. By the streak of it, he's getting a 15-point week this week. I know I'm just BSing, right? But it looks like probably this week is his 15-point week, and then the following week against Chicago looks like his 2-point week. Just putting it out there. Either way, we all know that Kenny Golladay gets a lot of usage in this offense. Without a starting running back, they are going to be throwing the ball a lot, especially against the Raiders, who have been playing offensively at another level that I did not anticipate them doing this year. So as of right now, Kenny G, probably a good play this week. Moving on to number 10, John Brown. John Brown gets to play against the secondary of the Washington Redskins. Again, the Washington Redskins have allowed so many points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season that it's unbelievable. I think anybody who plays against this team at the wide receiver position, at least if you're the number 1 wide receiver of your respective team, you should be getting started on the roster. I mean, Stefon Diggs last week, 143 yards. What is this? In week 7, the 49ers did not pass the ball. Congratulations to them. Miami the week before that didn't pass the ball. But yet, everyone keeps scoring touchdowns. Devante Parker had a touchdown the week before that. Julian Edelman had a touchdown the week before that. Somehow, Taylor Gabriel scored 3 touchdowns against this secondary. Not really much of a surprise. The secondary has struggled immensely thus far this season. And I think a guy like John Brown, who has at least had 50 receiving yards in every single game thus far this season. Should be good to go. I probably have him a little too high. But hopefully there's no... The weather issues kind of made a difference. Not really. But hopefully this week shouldn't be too much of a factor. Moving on to number 11, Tyler Lockett playing against Tampa Bay. I think Tampa Bay's defense will be stopping the run to an extent, which will force Russell Wilson to have to carry this game. Unlike last week, Russell Wilson really could have just sat back and just watched as the clock disappeared and the team easily won against the Falcons. This coming week, there's a little bit more urgency, in my opinion. I think Tyler Lockett's going to have to be a big contributor with Russell Wilson because this defense up front, especially pass rush-wise, having lost their offensive lineman Britt to an ACL injury, there's going to be a little bit of a gap in this offensive line, and it could force Russell Wilson to have to get the ball out of his hands quicker. We need Tyler Lockett to get more and more implemented. As of right now, this coming week, I think he's going to have a pretty good game. He's my number 11. Moving on to number 12, DJ Chark, playing against the Houston Texans. I do believe the Texans matchup is as juicy as it can get. I do think it's going to be a higher scoring event. And between these two teams, we've already seen them play once this season thus far. I keep saying thus far. I know it, guys. Don't worry about it. Last time these two teams played, DJ Chark was not a bad receiver. 9 targets, 7 receptions, 55 yards and a touchdown. We're probably going to see even better stats from him this coming week, considering how much the other receivers around him have developed. Chris Conley's becoming a 100-yard kind of guy every week. D.D. Westbrook in the slot is contributing heavily. Hopefully, maybe this week, we'll see. Keelan Cole has stepped up in the last couple of weeks. Leonard Fournette is heavily running the ball, which will help them in the play action area. As of right now, Chark, a guy that I want to play. And if you have him on roster and you're lucky to do so, go ahead and put him in there. Moving on to my 13 through 24 rankings, starting off with number 13, T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton had a tough matchup last week. I thought he was going to be able to take care of Chris Harris Jr. or they would line him up separately away from him. That wasn't the case. So this coming week, T.Y. Hilton, you get to play against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think the Steelers secondary, not great. Their most valuable asset, I guess, for the Steelers right now is their front seven. And because of how good the offensive line for the Indianapolis Colts have been thus far this season, goodness gracious, I'm losing it, guys. I'm losing my mind. I'm going to do this. You know what we're going to do? Here we go. I'm going to audible this a little bit, okay? And you're just going to take a couple breaths here. And then I'm just going to, quick thoughts, everybody, because I'm just losing my mind, guys. I really am. I don't know what's happening today. All right, T.Y. Hilton plays against Pittsburgh. Joe Hayden's probably going to be covering him. The front seven for Pittsburgh is probably their most valuable prospect. I think the offensive line for the Indianapolis Colts good enough to give Jacoby Brissett some time. Whether it's on the ground, through the air, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers probably are going to be shorthanded without James Conner. It's going to make it tough on them. We saw how much Mason Rudolph struggled this past week. I think this could be a game in which the Indianapolis Colts have the ball very often, and hopefully T.Y. Hilton can produce. All right, here we go. Oh, my goodness. All right, maybe that helps. Here we go. Let's do this, shall we? Keenan Allen, my number 14. Even though Keenan Allen has not been good since week 3. When I say good, I mean he hasn't even scored a touchdown since then. A guy that started off the season so hot has just completely disappeared within the offense, at least in the last 2 weeks. Has seen 10-plus targets in the last 2 weeks. That's perfectly fine. That's something that we want to see. But going forward, can we trust a guy like Keenan Allen? I don't know. I'm hoping that against Green Bay, we can trust them. The defense is good. That's something that we can't take away from Green Bay. And I think there is a chance in which if, in fact, the Green Bay Packers are ahead pretty early, which I probably expect to see, Keenan Allen can hopefully in the second half pick up some garbage time receptions and hopefully bring some value to fantasy owners because as of late, in a half PPR format, the dude hasn't even surpassed 10 points in the last, 5 weeks. Pretty upsetting. All right, moving on. Number 5, Michael Gallup. On the opposite side of Amari Cooper, there should be some value to be had outside of Ezekiel Elliott, who will be running the ball and probably be running all over the New York Giants. I do believe Michael Gallup, who had himself a pretty good game in Week 1 against said New York Giants defense, should be fine this week. I have a lot of expectations for Michael Gallup, especially in the matchup, considering how bad the secondary has been in terms of giving up points to opposing wide receivers. We saw Michael, in the last couple of weeks especially, we've seen the New York Giants struggle against wide receivers. Obviously, we didn't see it against the Cardinals, but this past week, Kenny Golladay was pretty good. Amendola was pretty good. Marvin Jones, even without scoring a touchdown, was still a pretty good contributing factor there. Michael Gallup should be good as my number 15. Moving on to 16, Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm a little worried about Juju. Yes, against Miami, he was able to produce, but everyone produces against Miami. That's not a difficult thing to ask. My real speculation is whether or not Juju Smith can produce against a defense that is going to double cover him and is going to make his life a little bit more difficult than it was last week. If, in fact, the running game isn't going and we don't have a James Conner consistently getting yards and getting first downs for this team, can a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster, with the quarterback play of Mason Rudolph, end up producing good numbers? I'm a little worried about the situation. Therefore, I have him outside of my top 12. I have him at 16 because he is one of my studs and I want to play him. But I just want to, at least temper my expectations on the week. I'm not expecting a huge 15-plus point game like he had last week. All right, moving on to number 17, we have Tyrell Williams, a guy that has been pretty consistent all season long in terms of being the number one wide receiver for the Oakland Raiders, a guy that has really stepped up into his role despite missing some time with the injury, came back, scored a touchdown, should be great this week against the Detroit Lions. It probably will be Darius Slay, but Darius Slay hasn't been incredible all season long. So I think Tyrell Williams moving around in the formation could be a valuable prospect and an asset for this team this week. He's my number 17. Moving on to number 18, Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson gets to play against one of the worst, if not the worst, secondary in terms of giving up points to the wide receiver position thus far this season. I think Trubisky, sure, is not the best quarterback in the National Football League. No one even needs to argue that. But the question remains whether or not a guy like Allen Robinson can produce, despite the quarterback play. He was able to produce, whether it was Chase Daniels, whether it's been Trubisky. He continues to see a great target share within this offense. Let me see here. Where's Mr. Allen Robinson? Allen Robinson this past week. Yeah, thus far this season, 13 targets, 7, 7, 7, 9, 16, 7. He sees so many targets on a weekly basis. He is going to continue to have value, and because of how easy this matchup is, or should be, I think he'll have a better week. He's my number 18. Moving on to Christian Kirk as my number 19. Even though I'm a little worried about this matchup, and I do think that Christian Kirk, coming off of injury, had a really good comeback game. I do believe it's going to be a tougher matchup, but there is no way that Kyler Murray is not throwing the ball for a majority of this game. Whether he's turning it over does not matter. Whether he gets the ball out of his hands and it goes in the directions of Christian Kirk is all that I'm pretty much anticipating. With the lack of depth that they have, especially considering the injuries that they've pretty much faced in that backfield, not having David Johnson, having Kenyon Drake off of a 1 week kind of deal, that's going to be tough to kind of adjust. Larry Fitzgerald hasn't been helping anybody. So as of late, it's really just all Christian Kirk that we get to hope ends up producing. I think he'll have a decent week, whether it's in garbage time or not. The guy has a lot of talent and continues to see a lot of targets with Kyler Murray. In terms of the last couple games in which Christian Kirk has produced, goodness gracious, can I type Kirk correctly? Let me look at these target counts because I know they're actually really good. Yeah, in the last couple games in which he's played with Kyler Murray, 12 targets, 8 targets, 12 targets, 11 targets, 5 targets. And when you're getting double-digit targets as the number 2 wide receiver of your own respective team, which you're almost becoming the number 1 after Larry Fitzgerald has kind of disappeared, should have some value. He's number 19. Moving on to 20, Coutland Sutton. The only worry that I have with Coutland Sutton is the change at quarterback. Yes, Drew Lock comes in off of IR with that thumb injury that they placed him on IR for earlier this season. I do think Coutland Sutton is the only receiving option on this team that you can trust. Because of the fact that Drew Lock is at quarterback, are we already chalking up, Coutland Sutton's lost all of his value? I don't think that's the case. I think if anyone is going to be having the ball thrown to them, it's Coutland Sutton. He is a bigger target. He is he is a much improved wide receiver from last year overall. And it's very visible when you watch him play. So as of right now, I still have some hope that Coutland Sutton will not be too dramatically affected by the change of quarterback. He should be good as my number 20. Moving on to number 21, Golden Tate. Sterling Shepard's probably not coming back for a little while because of the concussions. Golden Tate has been a great wide receiver option there, especially in full PPR, has been incredible. Half PPR just as well. Obviously, not getting a lot of value from touchdowns, but that's not what we expect from Golden Tate. We expect him to be a slot receiver, gets a lot of touches in terms of catches, and gets a good chunk of yards, and that's what he's been doing. He's my number 21 on the week. Moving on to 22. Alshon Jeffery gets to play against the Chicago defense. Chicago's defense has been tough in terms of stopping wide receivers, but they haven't been incredible. This defense is not the same as it used to be in years past, and as of late, I really do think that with the absence of Zach Ertz not being much of a factor, with this team running the ball so heavily, it could be a game in which this team just wants to run the ball the whole time with Miles Sanders and Jordan Howard. Give the ball to to Goddard. What the heck am I doing? To Goddard and Jeffrey. Hopefully Jeffrey can find some value. Here's the thing about Alshon Jeffery. If he doesn't score a touchdown, we're not expecting to see him catch 100 yards on said week. That's not the kind of receiver he has. He's never been that kind of guy. We're expecting a guy that in the red zone will get his targets. And I think that there's a very good chance in which we can find that this week. In terms of targets, 7, 9, 8, 12, 5, and 6. As of late, has not been good, but the team has not been great. It's either they're getting blown out or they're just blowing out an opposing team. I think this will be a closer matchup in which Alshon Jeffery will be used more often. And Alshon Jeffery needs to exact some revenge. If you guys don't remember last year, if I'm not, no, never mind. It wasn't against that team. Moving on. Number 23, Emmanuel Sanders. So here's the thing about Sanders. Plays on Thursday night. Ended up catching a touchdown this past week. If anybody's going to get some work, I mean, the last time Emmanuel Sanders played against a defense like this, as easy of a matchup the Cardinals have been, I think last year he played against the Cardinals. He had like a 20-something point game, threw a touchdown. Sure, it's a different team, different game. Overall, it's probably going to be Tevin Coleman running the ball very heavily. Brito will probably be out. But I do think that Emmanuel Sanders is probably going to get more and more looks as the weeks progress in order to get him more and more acclimated with the offense. Sure, he's been quick to pick up the offense. That's why he participated so much in last week's game. But in these coming weeks, if we can continue to see him see a lot of targets, especially work in terms of in the red zone, not a bad play. He's my number 23. Moving on to 24, Odell Beckham Jr. OBJ gets Chris Harris Jr. He's a stud, so I want to play him, but I'm scared of the matchup. I leave him at 24 because it's your decision. Moving on, let's go to number 25, Danny Amendola. Danny Amendola, 10-plus targets the last 2 weeks, plays against Oakland, has really solidified himself the last 2 weeks as pretty much like the number one wide receiver. Gets the most targets, gets the most receptions, gets a lot of yards for this offense. And the guy that, as of right now, if he's not already picked up, should have already been picked up from this week because of how consistent he's been. It's a great matchup, and I don't mind playing Danny Amendola whatsoever. He's my number 25. Moving on to 26, Corey Davis. I know Corey Davis didn't see much last week, but I think we'll get back on track with that. It'll probably end up being between him and A.J. Brown on who is the number one wide receiver for this team this coming week, playing against the Carolina Panthers, a defense that has given up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers in terms of yardage, not so much touchdowns, but I think Corey Davis really does have an opportunity this week. Therefore, he sits at my number 26. Moving on to number 27, DK Metcalf. Finally, was able to catch 2 passes in the red zone, and they, equated to touchdowns. Perfectly fine. I think as a bigger target, as this team continues to progress down into the red zone, it's going to be tougher to run the ball this week. DK Metcalf will be looked upon as a guy to contribute down in the red zone. Could find himself another touchdown. He's my number 27. Moving on to number 28, Jarvis Landry. If and when Odell Beckham is locked down and cannot produce, Jarvis Landry is going to be the only other one. I know that they have other receivers. That's perfectly fine. And they can run the ball just as well. But as of right now, in terms of whether Jarvis Landry is going to get a little bit of a boost, I think this is one of those weeks in which Jarvis Landry could find himself some value and be a pretty decent wide receiver 3 on the week. He's my number 28. Moving on to number 29, Chris Conley. In this matchup against the Houston Texans, the usage that Chris Conley has seen, his production, his size, his speed, all of that just makes me think he's going to continue. I think a guy like this with the amount of, thinking about the Houston Texans defense, right? There's not too many playmakers over there, right? So as of right now, we have DJ Chark in a good matchup, Gardner Minshew probably having a good game, Fournette having a good game. Those 3 we can probably rely upon. The question is, who is going to be that number 2 receiver for this team that's going to have a good game? Because there is going to be someone. And when we look at Dede and we look at Chris Conley and we look at Keelan Cole, all signs point to Chris Conley, and that's why he sits here. at number 29. So hopefully he can continue to perform as well as he has in the last couple of weeks. He's my number 29. Moving on to 30, Robby Anderson. Robby Anderson, this is your last chance. You play against Miami. Every time Sam Bradford or Sam Darnold, man, today's a weird day, wants to throw you the ball, somehow he throws a pick. So maybe it's on you, maybe it's on him. I don't know. I don't know if you were running the right route. I don't know if he threw it to the wrong side. It sucks. But this is your last week. I'm giving you the last final warning. This is it, Robby Anderson. You're my number 30. Moving on to 31, Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown, at least coming back into this offense, is going to help them in terms of opening up some running lanes because they won't be able to stack the box so often. They're going to have to respect him and Mark Andrews, which one of them they want to shut down and put away for this game. We'll figure that out, whatever Bill Belichick decides to do. But Marquise Brown does have value, does have the ability to have an upside game with the high ceiling and a decently safe floor if he finds targets. He's my number 31. 32, Marvin Jones. Like I mentioned earlier, I do think this contest between the Lions and the Oakland Raiders should be fine. The Lions aren't going to run the ball anymore. Rest of the season, I don't see them running the ball. If they end up having a 100-yard rushing game, I will not know what I'm going to do with myself. Because the running back talent they have, they tried to trade for Devontae Freeman. They're not going to be able to do it. What does this matter with Marvin Jones? The fact that they are going to continue to pass the ball means that a lot more wide receivers need to get touches and targets. And Marvin Jones will then see a boost because outside of Kenny Golladay and Danny Amendola as of late, Marvin Jones has been that guy. Moving on to number 33, Curtis Samuel. I'm still taking him over DJ Moore. DJ Moore just doesn't do it for me. So as of right now, hopefully the upside of a Curtis Samuel big play is upon us. I know Kyle Allen struggled heavily this past week, but maybe Curtis Samuel can get it done at 33. Moving on to number 34, we have Terry McLaurin. My concern, like I mentioned earlier, Dwayne Haskins. If Dwayne Haskins is the starting quarterback, you should not expect Terry McLaurin of old, in which he's having monster games. You should not expect that. You should expect something far less. And then once you've kind of dealt and finally realized that Dwayne Haskins is going to be starting his first time against the Buffalo Bills, maybe it's not a good idea to play a guy like Terry McLaurin, but he is their number one wide receiver. So if anybody's going to catch the ball, hopefully it would be him. Again, in the second half, Dwayne Haskins last week only threw the ball 5 times, completed 3 passes. Which is extremely unfortunate. So maybe we can turn it around here. Moving on to 35, Kenny Stills, still filling in for Will Fuller. In that matchup, which I have DJ Chark and I have Chris Conley and I have DeAndre Hopkins all on today's list. Kenny Stills, the number 2 for the Houston Texans, should be fine. If and when Darren Fells wants to stop stealing touchdowns in the red zone, maybe a guy like Stills and or DeAndre Hopkins could have more value. I think this might be one of those weeks. He's my number 35. My last wide receiver, a guy that has been he's been pretty consistent in the last couple of weeks in terms of targets. Maybe this is a game Miami wants to win. Maybe they want to beat the Jets. Maybe the Jets let them beat them because of how bad they are. Devante Parker's been pretty good. Him and Preston Williams have been pretty consistent this last couple of weeks. So, yes, they don't have high ceilings, but their floors are set with a good amount of touches. So that's not bad. All right, guys. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This was quite the slog. I don't know what happened to me. I've been mispronouncing and just messing everything up for the last, 30 some odd minutes. But thank you again. Hopefully this helps you out. We'll talk about wide receivers a little bit later in the week in terms of on Sunday morning for our live stream starting 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Tomorrow we'll talk about quarterbacks and tight ends. I got to hit the refresh button. I got to do something because as of late, just today was a weird day. But anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Until next time, if you haven't yet already, go check out that mid-season awards episode. I will have that somewhere like right there. And if you could check that out, that'd be awesome. If you guys haven't yet already, click the like button on today's video. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already again. Again, thank you again for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace. That was the wrong one.